All right, ready for a deep dive. Today we're looking at something a little different. It's not just about code, it's about coding like a craftsman.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. We're using this Algo Academy blog post as kind of our jumping off point, and they're really focused on bringing that artisan mindset into software development.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how they connect those two worlds.
Absolutely. And the cool thing is this isn't just for, hardcore programmers. We're talking ideas that can really apply to any field.
Right, where you want to do good work, where you take pride in what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's get into it.
Oh
This
yeah.
craftsman mindset, what does that even mean when we're talking about code?
Well, think about like a master woodworker, right? They're not just like slapping some wood together.
Yeah.
There's a real there's an art to it.
An art to it.
Yeah, they're choosing the right materials, they're paying attention to detail, they're taking pride in what they're making.
They're thinking about longevity.
Yeah, it's about bringing that same level of care to code.
So it's not just about, getting the code to run. It's about the quality of the code itself.
Exactly. It's about creating code that's not just functional, but readable, maintainable,
And
even beautiful in its own way.
beautiful code. I love that idea. And, Algo Academy, they really get into the nuts and bolts of what this looks like.
Yeah.
They talk a lot about clean code, readable code.
Right.
Why is that so important? I mean, if it works, isn't that good enough?
Imagine trying to follow a recipe, but the instructions are just like all over the place.
Oh, a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. Code's the same way.
Oh, okay.
Clean code, it's like a well-written recipe,
Right, yeah.
easy to understand, easy to follow.
So it's about making your code understandable to humans.
Yes. Not
Right.
just a computer.
Right, right. And, I mean, you might be that human later on.
Exactly. You come back to your code 6 months later and you're like, what is this?
Oh, I've been there.
You'll be glad you took the time to make it readable.
For sure. So how do you actually write clean code? The article talks about, like, meaningful names and keeping your functions focused.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So let's say you have a variable that stores the number of days until a deadline.
Okay.
Instead of calling it like X or num,
Right, which I've definitely done.
you'd give it a name like days until deadline.
Ah, okay, so it's clear.
Yes, it's descriptive.
Like labeling your spice jars.
Exactly. And keeping your functions focused, that's making sure each function does one thing well.
Okay.
It's not trying to do too much.
Like having a separate tool for each job.
Exactly. Instead of one giant, Swiss Army knife that does
I mean,
everything.
they can't even figure out how to use.
Right. Exactly.
They also talk about consistent formatting, which, maybe seems a little nitpicky.
Yeah.
But they make a good point about why it matters.
It's like reading a book where every chapter has a different font. It'd
Oh,
be so distracting.
okay, yeah.
Consistent formatting, it's like good typography.
It makes it more visually appealing.
Yeah, it makes the code easier to scan.
So it's about making it pleasurable to read, not just a jumbled mess.
Yeah, exactly.
Then there's this idea of self-documenting code,
Oh, yeah.
which sounds a little magical. Like the code is so clear, it doesn't even need comments.
Right. It's not always possible, but the idea is to write code that's so well structured that its purpose is obvious.
Okay.
Like instead of writing a comment that says, this function calculates the average, you just name the function calculate average.
It's like a really well-organized kitchen
Yeah,
where everything is labeled, where to find everything.
exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about writing clean code,
Right.
but what about testing? That seems like a big part of this whole Craftsman approach, too.
Absolutely. A craftsman wouldn't just build something and hope it works.
No.
They would test it to make sure it's solid.
Right.
And that's where test-driven development, or TDD, comes in.
TD. Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds a little intimidating, but I'm interested.
It's not as scary as it sounds.
Okay.
Imagine you're writing a recipe for a cake.
Okay.
But instead of just mixing everything together and hoping for the best,
Right.
you pace test along the way.
I see.
That's kind of what TDD is.
Okay.
You write a test that defines what success looks like for your code,
Right.
and then you write the code to make that test pass.
So you're setting the bar for quality before you even start coding.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It's like having a blueprint for your code.
Okay.
You're making sure it meets the specifications from the very beginning.
They actually give this cool example in the article with just a simple add function.
Yeah.
They start by writing a test that expects it to add two numbers correctly, and only then do they write the actual add function.
Right. And that has so many benefits.
Like what?
Well, it helps you catch errors early.
That's good.
But it also makes you think about the code from a user's perspective.
Okay.
So you're not just building something that works.
You're building something that works well.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that leads to more robust, more reliable software in the long run.
This has been a great start to our deep dive. We've unpacked this Craftsman mindset.
Yeah.
We've touched on some of these key practices, but there is still so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
We're just getting started.
Back again for more on coding like a craftsman.
Glad to be here.
So we've laid some groundwork with, that whole mindset and clean code and all that.
Right.
But now I kind of want to get into some of the meatier stuff.
Yeah, let's dive deeper.
The Algo Academy post talks about code reviews, which can be kind of a touchy subject.
It's true. Some people love them, some people hate them.
Right.
Yeah.
But when they're done right, they're really valuable.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And they really emphasize that it should be collaborative.
Right.
Not like a criticism session.
The learning opportunity.
Yeah. They even give some tips on giving good feedback. Oh, that's good.
So instead of just saying this code is messy, you could say, hey, have you considered extracting this into a separate function?
Yeah, that's much more helpful.
Right.
It's constructive.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into another thing they talk about, which is refactoring.
Oh yeah, refactoring.
Can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
So refactoring, it's like renovating a house, right? You're not changing the overall structure or the purpose,
right?
But you're improving the internals, like the layout and the functionality.
So you're basically cleaning up the code.
Exactly.
Making it easier to maintain.
Yeah, making it more efficient.
Without changing what it actually does.
Exactly. Think of it like, you have a closet that's just overflowing with clothes.
Oh, I know that feeling.
You could just keep shoving stuff in there, but eventually it's just a disaster.
Unmanageable.
Refactoring is taking the time to, reorganize that closet, add some shelves, maybe some compartments, so everything has its place.
Right. Right. So the article, it mentions some specific techniques.
Yeah.
Like extracting methods or renaming variables.
Yeah, those are good ones.
To make the code clearer.
Right, to make it more self-explanatory.
Okay, and then they go into some more heavy-duty stuff.
Yeah.
Like solid principles and design patterns.
Okay.
I gotta admit, those have always kind of intimidated me.
I understand. They sound really complex, but they're super helpful.
Okay, I'm willing to give them another shot.
All right.
Can you explain solid principles in a way that even I can grasp?
So imagine you're building a house.
Okay.
But every time you want to add a new room, you got to rewire the whole electrical system.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. That's kind of what it's like when code is poorly designed.
Okay.
Solid principles are like architectural guidelines
to
help you build software that's adaptable, that's easy to change.
So it's about creating a foundation that can evolve.
Exactly. It's about making sure your code is modular, flexible.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about design patterns? Those seem equally complicated.
So design patterns are like prefabricated building blocks.
Okay.
They're solutions to common problems that have been tried and tested
by other people.
By lots of other developers.
Okay.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Right.
Let's say you're building a website with multiple payment options, credit cards, PayPal, all that.
Right.
Instead of creating this giant, monolithic block of code to handle all those possibilities, you could use something called the strategy pattern.
Okay, what's that?
So the strategy pattern lets you encapsulate each payment method as a separate strategy.
Okay.
So it's easy to add new ones or remove ones.
So it's modular.
Exactly. It's modular.
Okay.
And that gives you a lot of flexibility, and it makes the code easier to maintain.
This is starting to make more sense now. I'm seeing how these concepts, which seemed kind of abstract, can actually make a big difference.
Absolutely. They're very practical.
Okay, good. I'm also curious about the emphasis on performance and efficiency in the article.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
Is that something a code craftsman really cares about?
Absolutely. A true craftsman, they consider not only how elegant the code is or how maintainable it is, but also how fast it runs.
So it's like building a car that's both beautiful and fast.
Exactly. And there are specific techniques that code craftsmen use to optimize their code.
Like what?
Well, for one, they pay attention to the data structures they use.
Okay.
It's like choosing the right container for storing ingredients in your kitchen.
Right. Yeah.
You wouldn't store flour in a tiny spice jar.
No, that would be a mess.
Exactly. Using the wrong data structure can really slow things down.
Okay.
Code craftsmen, they know how to pick the right tool for the job.
The article also talks about minimizing loops and iterations.
Yes.
Why is that so important for performance?
Imagine you're looking for a book in a library,
Okay.
but instead of using the card catalog, you have to check every single book on every single shelf.
Oh, that would take forever.
Right. That's what it's like when code has unnecessary loops.
It's inefficient.
It's inefficient.
Oh.
Code craftsmen, they're all about finding those shortcuts,
Okay.
streamlining the code to make it run as fast as possible.
And I remember them mentioning caching, too.
Ah, caching.
Can you remind me how that works?
Caching is like having a mental shortcut for your code.
Okay.
Instead of constantly recalculating a value,
Right.
you store it in a cache.
So the next time you need it, you don't have to recalculate it.
Exactly. You just grab it from the cache.
It's like having a frequently used recipe card on your counter.
Exactly.
So you don't have to dig through the cookbook every time.
That's a great analogy.
I'm starting to see how all these little optimizations,
Yeah?
they can really add up.
They do. It's about attention to detail. It's about finding those little efficiencies.
This has been an amazing deep dive into this whole coding like a craftsman thing.
It has.
We've explored the mindset, the principles, the practices.
Right.
But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really talked about yet.
And what's that?
Documentation.
Ah, yes, documentation. It's often overlooked.
Yeah, why is that so important?
Imagine you receive this beautifully crafted gift,
Okay.
but there are no instructions on how to use it.
Ah, that's frustrating.
It's frustrating. Code is the same way.
Okay.
No matter how elegant it is, if it's not documented, it's hard to understand.
So documentation is about making your code user-friendly.
Exactly. It's about providing context, explaining design decisions, guiding people through the code.
The article, it talks about the importance of clear comments within the code.
Yes.
What makes a comment good in the eyes of a code craftsman?
A good comment, it explains the why, not just the what.
Okay.
It gives you insights that you wouldn't get just from reading the code itself.
So it's not just stating the obvious.
No, it's about adding value.
Okay.
Like, explaining why a certain design choice was made or potential pitfalls to avoid.
It's like adding annotations to a historical document.
That's a great way to think about it.
You're giving context and interpretation.
Yeah.
They also mention documentation generation tools.
Oh, yeah. Those are super helpful.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure. There's JSDoc for JavaScript, Sphinx for Python.
Okay.
These tools let you write comments that can then be automatically processed.
So you don't have to do it manually.
Exactly. It streamlines the process.
And it makes it consistent.
Right.
They also stress the importance of keeping documentation up to date.
Oh, absolutely.
Why is that so crucial?
Outdated documentation is like a map with incorrect landmarks.
Oh.
It can lead to a lot of confusion and wasted time.
So just like a craftsman refines their code, they also have to maintain the documentation.
Exactly. It's a living document.
Speaking of living documents, they talk about commit messages.
Yes. Commit messages are important.
Why is that?
When they're written well, commit messages provide a history of the changes.
Okay.
They tell the story of how the code has evolved.
It's like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for other developers,
That's a great way to put it.
explaining the thought process behind the changes.
Right. A good craftsman uses commit messages to document their thinking.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this part.
We have.
Code reviews, refactoring, solid, design patterns, performance, documentation.
It's been quite a journey.
But there's one more crucial aspect of coding, like a craftsman.
Okay.
Continuous learning.
Ah, yes. That's the heart of it.
I'm really eager to hear your insights on that.
All right, let's dive in.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our deep dive on coding like a craftsman.
It's been a fascinating exploration, hasn't it?
Yeah, really, we've covered so much.
Mindset, practices, all those nitty-gritty details.
Clean code, refactoring, solid principles, design patterns, even documentation.
But there's one more piece that kind of ties everything together.
What's that?
Continuous learning.
Ah, yes. The never-ending quest for knowledge.
Exactly. And it's at the heart of being a craftsman.
Algo Academy really drives this point home.
Yeah, they do.
Learning never stops.
It really doesn't, especially in software development.
Things change so fast.
All the time. New languages, new frameworks, new ways of thinking.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
It is. But a craftsman, they embrace that.
They don't get overwhelmed by it.
They see it as part of the journey.
Okay, so how do you keep up with all that change?
Well, Algo Academy gives a bunch of suggestions.
Okay.
One of the big ones is staying connected to the community,
Makes sense.
conferences, online forums, open source projects.
Like being part of a guild, you know?
Yeah, sharing knowledge, learning from each other.
That's
Oh,
good.
and then there's self-directed learning too.
Oh, yeah. Reading, experimenting, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Books, articles, tutorials, taking on those challenging projects.
The ones that push you outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And they also mentioned getting feedback.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Code reviews are part of that.
Yeah.
But it can be more than that too, right?
Absolutely. Just asking for advice from more experienced
It's
developers.
just being willing to learn.
Exactly. A true craftsman. They're never too proud to ask for help.
That's a good point.
It's about recognizing that everyone has something to teach.
And everyone has something to learn.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny. We've been talking about coding this whole time.
Yeah.
But this craftsman mindset,
It goes way beyond coding.
yeah, it's really about like any field where you want to excel.
Right. Any craft where you care about quality.
I'm thinking like a woodworker, a musician, a writer.
It's all connected.
It's about that attention to detail, that striving for excellence.
And that constant desire to improve.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
any final thoughts on the power of this craftsman mindset?
You know, what really resonates with me is that it's not just about the end product.
It's about the journey.
Yeah, it's about finding joy in the process.
In the creating, the learning, the growing.
Exactly. It's about mastery, not perfection.
A good distinction.
And that mindset, it can transform not just your work, but your whole life.
Well said. This has been an amazing deep dive.
I agree.
Thanks for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for coming along on this journey. We hope you've learned something new about what it means to code like a craftsman.
And that you'll take these ideas and apply them to your own craft, whatever that may be.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep crafting.